If you enjoyed the channel and our video content and would like to support us, you can do this in a couple of ways. You can sign up to our Patreon site, which is a monthly subscription to one of our 4 tiers, each giving you something different from early access interviews up to exclusive unseen footage. There's also the option of a one-off donation via PayPal, which allows you the option to donate an amount of your choice. Both options really help to keep this channel going and to continue putting out regular content for you good folk. So please take a look at aircrewinterview.tv/donate, and I thank you in advance. Thank you and enjoy. Do you have any memorable stories you can share from your time on the KA-3B?
You know, it's like most sea stories, and I hope your audience has been fully vetted on the difference between fairy tales and sea stories.
I'm sure they have, yes.
Most fairy tales we grow up with start, well, once upon a time. And sea stories generally start with, now this is no shit. And that's about the only difference. You know, I had some memorable experiences. I remember inadvertently being the first to discover the Libyans had done some stuff and moved some things around. But because we had not, the way we would get signals, and this is so antiquated. Let's say I would pick up a signal and I would analyze and go, oh, that's associated with this platform. And I would get a bearing on it. And I would call up to the navigator up front who's keeping a plot, say, from where we are right now, this bearing, what's that go through? And I remember my nav coming back, well, it goes through this place. And I'm going, okay, cool. I know I know the Libyans have got that system there. They're just, yeah, okay. Didn't realize that beyond that bearing was another place that they actually did not have something until we discovered it, because we took several DF cuts as we went along, and then using magic, we figured out, oh, they all impact here, doing what's called a running line of bearing. And it was like, whoa, we found something new. In the early January, February, March of 79, we were doing some very intense ops in the Eastern Mediterranean, getting a lot of good data, passing it on. At the end of every day, by the way, we would get done, and I would go down to to some secure spaces and put out a message about, this is what we did today, this is where we went, this is what we saw, this is the big picture right now. We got back, and the CO met us on the flight line. And of course, when you're a JO and the CO comes out to meet you, generally it's not good. So they're like, oh God, what do we do now? And it was the CO passing along that our work had been noticed at the very highest levels, and had gotten the verbal, because at that point you didn't pass these things in writing. Verbal, y'all done good. We also had some memorable times. I was on the first U.S. aircraft carrier, the USS Nimitz, to ever visit Israel in April of 78. And that was a show. The morning that we were heading into Haifa, the Israeli Navy came out in flotilla size, met us, very smart seamanship, great U-turn, escorted us. We got a flyover of the Israeli Air Force, bunch of the Mirages and stuff. It was very cool, and we were welcomed. It was really, we were national celebrities and didn't realize it until you couldn't buy a drink in a bar and nobody said no to an offer of another beer. It was a lot of fun. We got to go a lot of neat places, besides the A3 being on whatever Navy port call, which generally a lot for the Sixth Fleet was Naples, and Naples. But Piraeus, I had the opportunity to go to Venice multiple times, which led me to be able to go to Florence multiple times. We would go up to the now NATO air base at Aviano, Italy, because we would run missions up and down the Adriatic, keeping an eye on then Yugoslavia. It's interesting. I had a recent experience literally this summer at Oshkosh. I met some guys who were all retired IDF Air Force pilots.
Oh,
They were
wow.
my they were my generation. We started trading stories because we knew the Israelis knew we were out there. We knew that they knew that we knew that they knew. All very gentlemanly, all very proportionate and appropriate. They'd run intercepts on the EA-3 back in the late 70s. It was easy to say, that was me.
Yeah.
So and so you come across these things now and then.
It's a small world, isn't it?
Were port calls. I got to see the Grateful Dead at the amphitheater next to the Sphinx in Cairo because
Wow.
I happened to be on the detachment on the John F. Kennedy in September of 1978 that put into Alexandria.
Wow. That's
So,
incredible.
and that was the beginnings of me being a deadhead.
Yeah.
How can you top
Yeah.
being at the top of the height of a partial lunar eclipse? And the celebrated American author Ken Kesey comes out on stage in classic Bedouin regalia and says in Arabic and then English, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Mars." And that starts the concert.
Wow. That's incredible. That's amazing. Oh,
Yeah. For me, it was just knowing. We used to say, we know what the day after tomorrow's headlines in the New York Times are going to be,
yeah.
only we know it today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it was something to be part of a program that, yeah, we knew that we couldn't even really discuss it with our spouses, even though they too had been vetted all the way through. I mean, this was a kind of thing where people would say, "Are you in any trouble?" Because the FBI came to my door today to ask how long we'd known you. There was a lot of reward that we knew at the National Security Council level, at the White House level, at Fort Meade and Langley. They knew who we were, they knew what we were doing, and they liked what we did. And that is incredibly fulfilling, even though, we didn't hand out medals. Stuff even the Air Force got medals for, the Navy wouldn't do it because their attitude was nobody needs to know, nobody should know. We know internally what you guys did, but you're not getting any ribbons or anything for this.
Yeah, got you.
Okay, we knew.
Let's move on to your time. You moved on to the KA-3B. How did this happen? And if you can tell us what that aircraft was all about.
Um, it came from the mistake of listening to other people tell me what I should do.
Right.
When I was it was about the time I was finishing up my tour at VQ2. It was also the end of the time of my basic obligated service after commissioning and the end of the time of my obligation from getting my NFO wings. All was coming together at the same time. And I contacted the Navy detailer, told him what I wanted to do. And after he stopped laughing, he said, "Well, what we want to do is send you to the Navy Postgraduate School at Monterey, California, and do the electronic warfare master's degree." And I knew even though I'd done pretty well, I did not have a fundamental EW STEM background. I knew what was in that EW curriculum. I knew I was going to get eaten alive. And even if I succeeded in getting my master's, because of how the Navy worked, I was going to be condemned to being probably a non-flying staff officer virtually all the rest of my Navy career. Nah, I did this to go flying.
Yeah, exactly.
So a bunch of my friends all said, you're an argumentative SOB, and you use a lot of big words, a lot that most of us scramble to a thesaurus at best and a dictionary at worst to figure out what it is you're saying. You should go to law school. And I knew the Navy wanted its senior officers, even back then, to have some sort of advanced degree. Okay, how about I leave active duty? I'll go to double secret probation, to use those famous words from Animal House, um, and get my law degree, and we'll talk. And I kept my commission. I just went to, I'm not really in the Navy status, and went and got into what was then the University of California, Hastings College of the Law in San Francisco, California. And that was a good deal. Um, there were several other veterans there. I embarked on it. Um, Coming out of a environment where you know right away how you've done, even if it's, I knew I got these signals. How my mission went, I knew by the end of the mission. How the flight went, we knew as soon as we trapped back aboard, because I knew how that pass at the back of the boat went. So the gratification is pretty quick. I went into an environment where you didn't know for 6 months to a year how you did in this course, because there are only one or two exams. And that's how the law works. Unless you're doing real wham bam criminal law cases, boom, 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 generally in civil practice, it's a long drawn out process. I kind of sensed that this wasn't a ton of fun, but I kept in touch with all my Navy buddies. And around I want to say it was the middle of, or the end of my second year, I wound up working in a law firm for the summer. One of the law partners there happened to be a very active naval reservist. And he said, "Hey, want to earn some extra cash?" Yeah, who doesn't? I said, "Come back, working with the Navy Reserves, you can come to my unit." So I did that my part of my last year in law school. And late in my third and final year, one of my old squadron buddies from Spain happened to be flying at the Naval Air Reserve squadrons. There were two tanker KA-3B squadrons right across the bay at Naval Air Station Alameda. He said, "Dude, we are short navigators. We need navs. You did that NAFO stuff. Come come back. It's virtually the best full-time, part-time job you'll ever have. We are so short and we deploy everywhere all the time. You can make this a full-time job." And it was like, well, I could do that. I could work 60 hours a week for a law firm, somewhere here in the Bay Area, sitting in an office, moving papers from A to B, billing for it, or I can go flying.
Yeah.
So it was like, yeah, you son of a bitch, I'm in. So after I took the bar exam, I went over to Alameda and did all the necessary transfer paperwork from the reserve unit I'd been in to what was kind of the system. Then you went to what was called a selected augment unit, an SAU, and that was VAK 1087. That provided people kind of like temporary agency to either VAK 308 or VAK 208. Again, as an explanation, Naval Air Reserves in the late 70s and all through the 1980s was the fifth largest air force in the world. We were huge. And the tactical end of it were Reserve Air Wing, Carrier Air Wing Reserve 20, that was the East Coast Reserve Air Wing, and Carrier Reserve Wing 30, CAG 30, for the West Coast. And they had all sorts of squadrons. In the late 70s, it was the standard that they had one iteration older than what the fleet had. For example, the fighter squadrons had F4s still. The attack squadron, there were no A6 squadrons. They were 3 A7A squadrons just beginning to get cast off A7Es. There were still RF-8G squadrons. There were still F-8s in the inventory. There were the KA-3s that had originally been EW squadrons, but they had never gotten EKA-3s. They'd always just had KA-3s. So it was, the finest Vietnam era air wing out there. And at that time, and this stayed pretty consistent and still stays consistent to this day. Unlike the Air Guard and the Air Force Reserve, you have to have been in the fleet before you can go to a reserve squadron. So every one of us had at least one fleet tour under our belts when we showed up. So we were a little salty. The O3s, the full lieutenants, the full two-ringers, they were the junior guys in the squadrons and in the ready rooms. So there was some real salt and lots of Vietnam veterans at that point and all that other stuff. So it was a pretty cool group. A lot of experience that I sat and listened to. I had to get back in. I had a little bit of an initial disadvantage because I had been in the back end. I didn't have a window seat, so to speak, in the whale, doing all that navigator shit. So I had to relearn all the stuff I had learned in my flight training, which, because I was in a situation, and I might mention at that point, my wife was a full-time U.S. Army physician, and she was there in San Francisco. So we were dual military family, no kids. I could afford to be gone a whole bunch. And so I just jumped in with both feet and started doing trips and detachments and stuff like that, and relearned basic aerial navigation. And on top of it, learned long range over water navigation. The best thing we had was the VLF Omega navigation system, and people can Google that. This predates anything like we have today. It was a step up from Loran. In fact, the first KA-3s, when I was in them, had old coffee grinder, we called them Loran Charlie receivers, that you had to get readings and plot them on a specialized chart and do some guesswork and stuff like that. It was combined celestial and dead reckoning navigation. We had a drift angle ground speed system when it worked. We had Omega. We had a built-in sextant. So I was doing that Magellan stuff. But as a result, that's how I wound up in the tanker whale. And everybody loves a tanker. Everybody. We also say the fastest aircraft in any Navy air wing is the tanker, because you never see a fighter pass up a tanker.
But did you enjoy your time as in the tanker world, coming from the E world?
Loved it. Absolutely loved it. I got to see much more of the world. Oh heavens! Multiple translants, transpacks, up through, and we got to work with a lot of other countries too. That was part of the fun. We went out to the Far East. We worked with our sister squadron, VQ-1, giving them aerial refueling for their EA-3Bs when they were going far afield, which meant multiple trips through Hawaii, Wake Island, Guam, the Philippines, Korea, Japan. Uh, we were up to Alaska and all through supported the RCAF everywhere from Vancouver, British Columbia, all the way out to St. John's, Newfoundland, Gander, Goose, Bagotville, Quebec, Cold Lake, Alberta, just
Everywhere.
all and numerous. We used to take the Blue Angels when they were flying Skyhawks.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, because
Awesome.
they needed gas to go on long locations,
Yeah,
and we would work with them to provide their aerial refueling. They'd give us a call and say, "Hey, can you meet us next Tuesday overhead Amarillo, Texas? And we're going to have, this is where we're going when we're doing it." And we'd work out a rendezvous with air traffic control and top them off so they wouldn't have to stop in somewhere for gas.
incredible. What was your favorite aircraft that you got to refuel, I guess?
Favorite to give gas to? That's a great question. And I'd have to think about that because they were all fun for me as an airplane geek. Um, I think passing gas to the F8s was kind of cool because it was very retro. Same with the F4s. Um, I loved taking the CF5s we had a special working relationship with 434 Squadron, the schooners, and they were F5s. And those were great because they understood the drill: in and out, top off, move off to the side, let the next guy come in.
Mhm.
Um, Trying to think of anything hyper unusual that comes to mind at the moment.
Did you
Uh,
ever like get to refuel any like the British guys or any of the Europeans?
I'm trying to remember. We did practice plugs, if I recall correctly. I want to say with some Tonkas.
Okay, right.
We were working out of Sicily doing a combined NATO exercise, and we somehow wound up with some tornadoes joining on us, and we said, "You want to give it a go?" And they,
Yeah.
out came the boom. Said, "Sure, mate."
Oh, that's awesome. That's really
you
cool.
know,
But
so that was awful fun, and we did
yeah.
all sorts of things. A lot of times, for example, the S3 squadrons down in San Diego would be qualifying guys on refueling. Off we'd go to the airspace off San Diego and anchor out late in the afternoon. These guys would come out, we'd give them a little gas, and they would practice plugging the basket.
Okay.
The nice thing about the A3 is with the engines out on the wing and a centerline drogue, you had a pretty stable platform most days.
Mhm.
So it gave the newbies a real chance to get practice on maneuvering that aircraft because unlike the USAF and a few other countries, you don't hold a solid, steady formation on the tanker aircraft and they fly the drogue into you. It's up to you as the pilot of the aircraft to plug into the drogue that's being streamed. And we too would do practice plugs and full time plugs. One of the ways we would get to Hawaii on a transpac, if the winds were not optimal, is we would launch, say, three A3s. First A3 would top off the airplane going to Hawaii and the second A3 and turn around and go back to Alameda.
Mhm.
Further down the line, that then full second tanker would again top off the airplane going to Hawaii and he would go back. So a lot of times we plugged ourselves.
But because we're going to wrap up this part, because we're going to do a part two with you, Andy, and I'm sure our viewers will love it on the A6. So that's a whole different episode.
Oh,
So how many hours did you get on the whale, and which did you prefer, the E or K roll?
I think I came out with right around 2,500 whale hours and over 100 whale traps. I still have, I might send you a picture of it. I got my 100th whale trap. I was a whale centurion, which either means I was phenomenally lucky or always active to go out on a detachment. I'm not sure which, or both. I have the hook point from that. So I had well over 100. I was a whale centurion in a time when that was becoming increasingly rare, unlike the Vietnam era guys or the guys who were doing it back during Vietnam. So I had about 2,500 total whale hours, something along that. Somewhere in my boxes of stuff, I have certificates from Douglas Aircraft Company for my 1,500th and my 2,000th hour. And I think I've got a 2,500 hour certificate,
Very cool.
which was, compared to some guys, not even close, but compared to a lot of others, yeah, I guess I was busy. I had
Yeah.
one year I got 400 whale hours, and that was in the reserves.
Wow. Yeah.
Like full-time, part-time job. It was what I was doing for a living, and I could still elect to not do certain things. As to favorites, they're both my rides. I mean, the EA-3B, what a cool deal to be doing something very unique.
Yeah.
I mean, we were the only guys in the Atlantic theater and in the Med that were doing what we did. And it had cool capabilities. And I want to add, we also learned to work with and worked with the E2 guys, like my one of my buddies, and the S3s that all had ESM systems, helped work with them to show them how to make those systems really tweak. And we worked with our brethren in the EA-6B. So you had 4 platforms that could do ESM, which allowed you to do some pretty cool targeting stuff passively. You could really wait till you got in close before you schwacked people because we were not emitting ourselves. So it was cool doing that mission. The frustrations that came from kind of not having the parts and stuff like that was a little hard. The KA-3, good gosh, I got so many cool experiences out of that. And again, we were so rare. The Navy actually expanded the number of A3s that were out there during the end of the Cold War. During the 80s, when the Cold War expanded, in a sense, and the Navy Air Wings transitioned to F-14s, A-7Es, F-18s. The F-14s got tarps, so the RF-8s went away. There was more S-3 integration, although there were never any reserve S-3s. That was a time that we were flying everywhere, going everywhere, and everybody loved a tanker. I'll let folks know, when it came time to begin to retire the KA-3, one of the biggest, screeching of the phonograph needle sounds came from Ottawa, unbeknownst to us, because everybody thought we knew this. The RCAF had incorporated the KA-3 and its uses into their NATO war plans. They had planned for years that the KA-3s were going to ferry their CF-5s to Norway to fight the Russians on the Northern Front.
Wow.
And they said, wait, no, you can't go away. We need you.
We need you. Yeah.
And it got to the point that it went from RCAF to whomever at the Department of National Defense, who went to our DOD and said, you can't do this, who went to the Department of the Navy and said, the Canadians say you can't do this, to which the Department of the Navy and bean counters and all of that said, we will be happy to keep the KA-3Bs in operations if Canada wants to pay for it.
Yeah, of course.
And that was the end of that.
Yep.
But we had hopes for a while.
Yeah, it was there, it was there. But that was a great chat about the whale there. So thank you for sharing a bit of your story. I'm sure we'll get you back on to go into more detail. But Andy, can we find you online anywhere where our fans or viewers can interact with you?
I've been known to hang out as Andy Niemyer on Facebook. I mainly post bad puns, humorous memes, and a little bit of art, uh, and occasional trip stuff from my travels that I still do. And I'm first initial, last name A Niemyer on X. Again, mainly reposting airplane stuff and a few other bits and pieces of things, and where I can be found hanging out with the likes of F-111 driver and a few other miscreants.
Well, Andy, thank you very much for coming on the show, and I can't wait to get you back on to talk about the A6.
Happy to talk about my buddy the intruder.
Absolutely. Cheers, mate.